"Please don't call me your girlfriend in public," she said, after half a year of dating. The woman I thought I was going to marry asked me to pretend we were strangers, and the reason why would change everything I thought I knew about love. Hey everyone! Before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support! My name is Leo, I'm 28, and for 6 months I thought I was living in a romantic comedy. You know the type, the kind where the soundtrack is always perfect, the light hits her face just right during a sunset, and every inside joke feels like it was written by a team of Oscar-winning screenwriters. Her name was Clara, and she was the most vibrant, intoxicating person I had ever met. We met in the most cliché way possible, spilling coffee on each other in a crowded downtown cafe. But instead of being annoyed, she just laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze, and told me I owed her a new latte and a story. That was it. I was gone. The first month was a blur of late-night phone calls and firsts that felt like the most important moments in history. Our first date wasn't just dinner, it was an adventure through a part of the city I'd never explored, with her pointing out hidden murals and telling me the history of old brick buildings. Our first kiss happened under a streetlight that flickered on just as our lips met, a moment so serendipitous it felt staged. She had this way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. A simple Tuesday night cooking together in my small apartment would become a culinary masterpiece, complete with makeshift aprons and a dance party in the kitchen while the pasta water boiled. By the 3rd month, my toothbrush was in her bathroom and her favorite ridiculously expensive herbal tea was in my cabinet. We were a unit. We did everything together. We went hiking on weekends, her always a few steps ahead, turning back to flash a smile that made my chest ache. We built a ridiculous 7,000-piece puzzle of a nebula on her coffee table, a project that took us a month and felt like a metaphor for how we fit together. She knew how I took my coffee without asking, and I knew to have a blanket ready on the couch for her because she was always cold. She'd met my sister and they'd gotten along famously, spending an entire afternoon at a flea market and coming back with a bizarre ceramic cat that now sat on my bookshelf. I was in love. Not the casual, fleeting kind, but the deep, terrifying, all-consuming love that makes you scan the future and see only one face. I started thinking about things I'd never considered before. Not just moving in together, but what it would be like to wake up next to her every day for the rest of my life. I'd catch myself watching her sleep, her breathing soft and even, and feeling a wave of protectiveness so strong it was almost overwhelming. She was my person. I was so sure of it. We were the couple our friends were both envious of and slightly sick of, always holding hands, always finishing each other's sentences. We were perfect, or so I thought. The night of my company's semi-annual mixer, I was ready to show her off, to stand with her in a room full of my colleagues and declare to the world, without words, that this incredible woman was mine. I had no idea that by the end of the night, the perfect world I had so carefully constructed around us would be reduced to rubble. The ballroom of the hotel was a sea of suits and shimmering dresses, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of 100 conversations. Clara looked breathtaking. She wore a deep blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair swept up in a way that showed off the elegant line of her neck. As we walked in, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. This wasn't just a date, this was my partner, my other half. We navigated the room, smiling, nodding, her presence a calming anchor in the sea of corporate small talk. She was charming and witty, engaging my boss in a conversation about modern art that I couldn't follow, but was mesmerizing by nonetheless. About an hour into the evening, I saw my old college buddy Daniel across the room. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, and I was excited to introduce him to the woman who had become the center of my universe. I led Clara over, a wide, genuine smile on my face. Daniel's face lit up when he saw me, and we clapped each other on the back in a familiar, friendly greeting. "Daniel, it's so good to see you," I said, my voice full of warmth. "I want you to meet someone. This is my girlfriend, Clara." The moment the word girlfriend left my lips, I felt a subtle but immediate change. The hand that was resting on my forearm tightened, her nails digging into my sleeve just enough for me to notice. Her smile, which had been so natural and bright just seconds before, became a fixed, brittle mask. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with amusement, went wide with a flicker of something I couldn't identify. Panic, maybe? Or fear? Daniel, oblivious, smiled and extended his hand. "It's great to meet you, Clara. Leo here has been ridiculously secretive about you." Clara took his hand, her grip brief and limp. She mumbled something that sounded like "you too," but her gaze was fixed on me, a silent, desperate plea. My mind raced. What was happening? Was she just shy? That didn't make sense. She'd been holding court with my boss 10 minutes ago. I tried to brush it off, to continue the conversation, but the air had turned electric with tension. I could feel Clara's anxiety radiating off her in waves. After a few agonizing minutes of stilted pleasantries, she excused herself, saying she needed to find the ladies' room, and practically fled. I stood there, confused, making excuses to Daniel before following her. I found her in a quiet hallway overlooking the hotel's empty garden, her back to me, her shoulders trembling slightly. I put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Clara, are you okay? What's wrong?" She turned around, and her face was pale, her eyes filled with a distress that cut me to the core. She took a deep breath, and in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, she spoke. She didn't use the exact words, but the meaning was burned into my memory. She asked me, please, not to call her my girlfriend. Not in public. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise from the ballroom faded into a distant, muffled roar. All I could hear was the frantic, pounding beat of my own heart and the single, screaming question in my head, why? The car ride home was suffocating. The silence wasn't comfortable or companionable. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket, smothering every thought I had. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my eyes fixed on the ribbon of highway illuminated by our headlights. Clara sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, a silhouette against the passing city lights. Her request echoed in my mind, a fragment of a sentence that had detonated my entire reality. Please don't call me your girlfriend in public. It wasn't an angry request. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea, laced with a vulnerability that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. My mind, a traitorous organ, began a frantic, desperate inventory of the last 6 months. Every memory, every shared moment was now placed under a harsh, unforgiving microscope. I thought about the first time I met her friends. Or had I? I realized with a jolt that I had never actually met a group of her friends. It was always a cousin here, a work colleague there, always in passing, never in a setting where I could truly get to know them. Her social media was a curated collection of landscapes, art, and abstract quotes. There were no pictures of us. No tagged posts, no digital footprint of our relationship whatsoever. I had always thought she was just a private person, an old soul in a modern world. Now, it felt like a deliberate erasure. Every time we were out in a crowded place, I now remembered her subtle withdrawals. The way she would pull her hand back if we walked past a large group of people. The way she would avoid posing for pictures with me at parties or events. I had interpreted it as shyness, as a quirk. I had even found it endearing. Now, it felt like a series of carefully constructed exits, a lifetime of escape routes. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. Who was this woman? The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I was building a future with in my mind, suddenly felt like a stranger. A beautiful, enchanting stranger with a wall around her so high and thick I hadn't even known it was there. When I finally pulled up in front of her apartment building, the engine cut out, plunging us into a deeper silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to shake the truth out of her. But looking at her profile, etched in the dim glow of the streetlight, I saw only a profound sadness that mirrored my own confusion. She wasn't being malicious, I was sure of that. This wasn't a game. This was pain, deep, ancient pain. She turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and whispered that she was sorry. She said she would explain, but not tonight. And then she was gone, slipping out of the car and into the building, leaving me alone with 1,000 poisonous questions and the hollow, echoing space where my perfect relationship used to be. I drove home through the empty streets, a man adrift in a sea of doubt, realizing that the woman I loved was a ghost, and I had been living in her haunted house all along. The next few days were a special kind of hell. We spoke on the phone, but the conversations were stilted, filled with the heavy baggage of what was left unsaid. She would ask how my day was, and I would give a monosyllabic answer. I would ask about hers, and she would offer a vague, fine. The effortless flow that had defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a jagged, nervous energy. I was living in a state of perpetual high alert, my senses tuned to any clue, any hint of an explanation. I became a detective in my own life story, and the prime suspect was the woman I loved. My apartment started to feel like a surveillance operation. I'd find myself replaying our conversations, dissecting her every word and gesture for a hidden meaning. I'd scroll back through our text messages, looking for a sign I had missed. The paranoia was a physical presence, a cold knot in my gut that never went away. I felt like I was losing my mind. One part of me, the rational part, told me to just wait, to trust her and let her explain when she was ready. But the other, more desperate part, the part that was dying from the uncertainty, needed answers now. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. All I could do was think about her, about us, and the giant gaping hole where the truth should be. On Thursday, I went to her place after work. She had asked me to come over, saying we needed to talk. My heart hammered against my ribs the entire subway ride there. This was it. I was finally going to get the explanation. But when I arrived, she was on a work call, looking stressed and apologetic. She mouthed that it would be a while, and I told her it was fine, that I would just wait. I wandered into her living room, a space I knew as well as my own. But now, it felt different. It felt like a crime scene. My eyes scanned everything, looking for something out of place. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner of her bookshelf, behind a stack of art books, was a small, dusty wooden box I had never noticed before. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I told myself I was just being curious, that it was probably just old keepsakes. But a deeper, darker instinct told me I was about to open Pandora's box. The lid creaked open. Inside, nestled in faded tissue paper, was an old photo album. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. The first few pages were filled with pictures of Clara, younger, her face alight with a joy I recognized but had never seen directed at a camera. And she wasn't alone. In every picture, she was with a tall, handsome man with a kind smile. They were hiking, laughing on a beach, building a sandcastle. They looked deliriously happy, in love. I flipped to the back of the album and my blood ran cold. They were wedding photos. Clara in a simple white dress, the man in a tuxedo, their faces full of pure, unadulterated bliss. But in every single photo, the man's face had been meticulously, violently torn out, leaving a jagged, gaping hole where his features should be. I slammed the album shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. A wife? Was she a wife? Was she a widow? I put the box back exactly as I found it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steady it. I sank onto her couch, the truth I had been so desperate to find, now feeling like a 1,000-pound weight crushing my chest. I sat on that couch, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The image of the torn-out face seared into my mind. The possibilities were a whirlwind of horror in my head. Was she married to a man she had left? Was he abusive and she was in hiding? Was he dead, and she was so shattered she couldn't bear to see his face? The last thought brought a wave of empathy so sharp it was painful. I wasn't just a man in a confusing relationship anymore. I was a man who had stumbled upon a profound and deeply buried tragedy. The weight of it was immense. When Clara finally walked into the room, her face etched with weariness, she took one look at me and knew. She knew I knew. Her shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to go out of her all at once. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just walked over to the armchair opposite me and sat down, wrapping her arms around herself as if for protection. The air between us was thick with unspoken grief. I didn't know how to start. How do you ask someone about the ghost in their photos? How do you broach a subject so clearly painful? I decided to start with the truth, or at least my part in it. I told her I was sorry, that I hadn't meant to pry, that I was just so lost and confused. I told her about the box, my voice barely a whisper. As I spoke, I watched her face. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Then another. Soon she was crying silently, her body shaking with the force of a sorrow she had kept locked away for years. It wasn't a performance. It was a dam breaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw and fractured. She told me his name was David. They had been high school sweethearts, each other's first and only love. They had built a life together, full of the same small, perfect moments I thought were unique to us. They had gotten engaged and were planning their wedding. 2 weeks before the wedding, David was driving home from a late-night study session for his master's degree. A drunk driver ran a red light. He was killed instantly. In that moment, Clara said, the future she had so carefully planned, the world she had so lovingly built, simply ceased to exist. The grief was a physical thing, a monster that consumed her. She told me that for years she couldn't even say his name. The labels they had shared, boyfriend, fiancé, became like poison on her tongue. To call someone her boyfriend again felt like a betrayal, like trying to replace a part of her soul that had been ripped away. It felt like tempting fate, like daring the universe to shatter her all over again. She had torn his face out of the photos, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need to survive, to stop the constant stabbing reminder of what she had lost. When she met me, she said, she tried to be normal. She wanted to be the person I fell in love with. But my simple, proud declaration at that party had triggered a trauma so deep, so primal, that her defense mechanisms had kicked in without her consent. She wasn't rejecting me, she was protecting the broken, terrified little girl still living inside her. The silence that followed her confession was different from any that had come before. It wasn't awkward or tense, it was sacred. It was a space filled with a raw, brutal honesty that stripped away all pretense. I looked at the woman I loved, and for the first time, I saw all of her. I saw the vibrant, funny, intelligent woman who had captured my heart, but I also saw the wounded survivor who had carried an unimaginable burden alone for so long. The mysterious, guarded woman I had been agonizing over for the past week vanished, replaced by someone infinitely more complex and profoundly human. My confusion and paranoia melted away, replaced by a tidal wave of empathy and a fierce protective love. I realized then that my fear wasn't about her having a secret past. It was about the fear that her past meant there was no room in her future for me. But hearing her story, I understood it wasn't about me at all. It was about her journey, her pain, and her incredible courage in even trying to love again. The perfect, idyllic relationship I thought we had was a fantasy I had constructed. What we had was something real, something messy and complicated and fragile, and it was infinitely more precious. The labels, girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, they were just words. They were boxes we tried to fit our messy, beautiful lives into. What mattered was the connection, the choice to stand by someone, not just in the light, but in the darkness too. I didn't have a grand speech prepared. I didn't know the right words to heal a wound that deep. So I did the only thing I could think of. I got up from the couch, crossed the small space between us, and knelt in front of her. I took her hands in mine, which were still trembling, and I just held them. I looked into her tear-filled eyes and let my own gaze convey everything I felt. I wasn't there to fix her. I wasn't there to be her savior. I was there to be with her, to walk alongside her on her path to healing, no matter how long or difficult it might be. I squeezed her hands gently, a silent promise. A promise of patience, of understanding, of a love that didn't need a label to be real. In that moment, we weren't a perfect couple from a romantic comedy. We were just two people, scarred and imperfect, who had found each other in the wreckage. And as she looked back at me, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a real, true, and terrifyingly beautiful beginning.